All right, manufacturing leaders, it is time for episode 4 of the People in Production podcast. I am really enjoying this. I'm really loving the feedback that we're getting. Today, our guest is Brandon Herring from Zephyr Products Incorporated. Brandon is a friend. I've gotten to know him over the past year and have really come to appreciate him, how he shows up and the energy that he brings to whatever room that he's in. Love it. In this episode, you're going to hear from Brandon as he talks about the relationship between sales and production. He's going to talk about culture through the shop into sales and how that culture from the shop flows into how he communicates to other people. He's going to talk about when to say no. I find that to be an interesting piece. And then he shares a little insight as to how Zephyr tackles their first article process. Good stuff there. And then he shares a number of other things like moving forward after failing with your group. How do you not cast blame? How do you avoid getting rooted in the frustration of past projects? So a lot of other things that Brandon's going to share. This is one of 2 episodes from Brandon, and part 2 will be coming in our next release. But check this out with Brandon, and if you would, be sure to subscribe to this podcast in whatever venue or avenue you're watching it, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Apple Play, whatever environment you're checking it out. Please subscribe. Keep up to date with what we're going. And then I'd also love for you to offer some encouragement and some gratitude to Brandon for sharing his insights. So check out part 1 of my interview with Brandon Herring. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the show. I am really excited for having Brandon Herring with me. He is from Zephyr Products. And Brandon, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, man, I am looking forward to this. Full disclosure, I want to let people know that Zephyr is a client that I work with, and I actually helped to run a program that you helped create at Zephyr, if I understand right. So you had a vision for, hey, how do we onboard these guys that are coming into our company? And you started creating some things around that. We're going to dive into that a little bit. But before we go there, tell me, what is Zephyr Products and what type of services do you guys provide?
So we are a metal contract manufacturer. So job shop. We don't have our own product. We make parts for other people and a litany of different markets. Well, whether it's construction to transportation, aviation, transportation, rail car. We work in a lot of different markets where we make parts for these customers, and then they assemble their parts and then ship them to wherever they need to go. So.
And you do laser, you do cutting, you do welding, you do
Yes.
fabricating, you do machining. You kind of work a wide swath of services, don't you?
Correct. So we primarily process carbon steel, stainless steel, and aluminum. Whether that starts out as a sheet of metal or some sort of structural material, whether it's round tube, square tube, round bar, square bar, angle. We process that material. So we'll cut it on the laser or our tube laser. We will form that part if it needs to be bent. Then we take it. If it needs some machining, we do have some machining capabilities. Then also we have many different types of welding that we do here. And then finally we do powder coating. So if you want to do a certain type of powder coat paint, we do that as well.
That's awesome. So what's your ideal client? Who's a good connection for Zephyr Products?
Well, so we obviously, like many people in our field, prefer a repeatable work. Though we are a job shop, there is a learning curve, so if it's something that's going to be repeatable, so that we can get our first articles out of the way, so that we can perfect the part, so that we can continually make it, repeat it with quality, and be able to find efficiencies from building that part repeatedly, so that we can make timelines for those customers that have build schedules that we can meet. But those customers can range from any, really, like I said, a litany of different markets that we cater to.
Awesome. So tell me about your role with Zephyr. What do you do?
I'm currently in an outside sales role. So really I maintain relationships, develop new relationships. And that's what I love about my job, because I can talk all day long. And but no, that's there's a lot of things to Zephyr that are for us that the audience may or may not know that we do more than just making parts here. So my job is to maintain the existing relationships that we have, develop the mind share within those relationships so that we can, do more work. We focus on creating partnerships with our customers. We don't we're not constantly going out and trying to find new customers. We're strengthening the relationships we have with our existing customers so that we can expand that mind share within those customers.
That's great. How long have you been with the company?
Almost 8 years.
Okay. So what's kind of interesting to me, and as I shared, I've worked with Zephyr, I know a lot. I like to talk a lot about culture, and that's a fascinating conversation. And you're not necessarily a guy that goes out and you're on the floor working the shop, working with the materials themselves and the guys operating that. Yet in sales, culture is still a dynamic for you. How you interact with other companies, how you interact with your team, if something needs to be done a certain way, or if there's a change order or something like that. Tell me a little bit about how you experience the Zephyr culture and how you, as a salesperson, become an extension of whatever culture Zephyr says it has. Does that make sense?
I think so. Well, I basically advocate for our customer, right, to our shop, and in most companies, you have this a little bit of opposition between production and sales, right?
Sure.
Production doesn't like change. There's only a finite number of resources that you can do, and sales is always trying to push that bar, right? We're trying, no, we can do more, we can do more, we can do more. But in the same case, we're also representing the customer's expectations within the organization. So, I know what my customer expects based, or our customer, I should say, expects based on my interactions with them. I've seen the parts that their end result, so I understand the level that we need to be. And so a lot of times that'll be my job is to articulate that to our production team. So not only just expectations for time frame, delivery, and those types of things, but also the level of detail that needs to be coordinated, or based on the volume, how do we need to approach this project? And so I do work with our project team in a lot of facets, especially when we're onboarding new customers or a new product line for a customer that's like new parts for us, where I work with not only our strategic product folks, but also our first article folks to make sure that those expectations are delivered. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yes. So what's interesting to me is there are two value points that you need to connect. You need to understand who Zephyr is, but you also need to understand who your client is. How do you get an understanding of, hey, this person that I'm talking to, what do I pick up about who they are, what their organization is, and how does that affect how you interact with your own company in that regard?
Well, that's a great question. So I think a lot of times, you can have any type of salesperson, I guess, but in what I've learned in this line of work is you have to have an intimate, like what I would say, at least a high level, intimate understanding of your capabilities. So I started at Zephyr in estimating, which requires you to know, you have to know a little bit about every work center so that you can properly estimate it, so that you can put a price to it, right? So how much time and what the operation, how that work center works, so that you can understand whether it's in our wheelhouse or not, right? So that's the first part of the conversation with the customer that says, hey, I have this problem. Can you help me solve it? Well, they show me a part. I'm looking at it. Well, do we have the capabilities to make this part? Is it a good fit for us because it's maybe a little bit outside of our comfort zone, but it's still in the realm of our possibility, right? So it's knowing that capability so that I can say, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, yes, we could probably help you with this part, or whoa, that's not something that we don't typically do. There's so many different variations of metal fabrication that really having an understanding of what those capabilities are that you can do or what your partners can do. So I think, I know we'll probably get into this, but like that's the value of being in like a group like NTMA, is that having this understanding of all these potential partners that we have in this group that have this extension, if for lack of a better term, of your capabilities, right? So, and so bridging that gap for what's good work for us and what's probably not a good fit for us is the first part of the conversation when talking to customers.
That's great. So what's the parameters that would be a no for you? Is it volume of work? Is it type of material? Help me understand a little bit. And when is it an opportunity for you to say, you go to your shop manager and just say, hey, we've got this opportunity. Are we willing to expand to this? How do you know what to say no to and what to say yes to?
Well, so kind of a combination of all the above, right? So first of all, if it's some sort of material that is outside of carbon steel, stainless steel, or some variation of aluminum, that's going to throw my first flag, right? Like if it's some kind of vibranium or something that we don't, that, is very scarce and an unknown demand or something, or I don't even know in the first place, based on what my suppliers and the awareness I have of their product line, is it even something I can get? The other thing is that what type of operations would go into making this part? Okay, so we've identified that the material is something that we are familiar with and we do have access to. What operations need to go into making this part? And so having that understanding of the capabilities that our shop has or our partners have, it goes into whether or not that part is a good fit for us. The other thing is the volume, right? So if it's a really complicated part and we might make it a couple of times a year, is the learning curve, as far as the opportunity, is it going to cost me more to learn how to make this part? Or is it something that, it's just better left to a shop that specializes in making one-offs, that might be outside of what we do based on who we are as a company. We do a lot of on-the-job training here. So where some companies you might pay a lot more, but you're also paying for a skill level that's already there. Where we have lots of high-level skills here, but we're also doing a lot of on-the-job training. So and so having that understanding and where that balance is plays a lot into those conversations.
That's an interesting thing. I was actually on the shop floor at your place earlier this week, in fact, and I was talking with one of your guys who had been doing a great, big, massive project, heavy material, large project that they were working on. And I just said, it'll be interesting. Did you say you've got another one of these coming up? And they said, yeah. And I said, after having done the first one, how long do you think it'll take to do the second one? And he said, oh, we're going to cut the time by a dramatic amount because we've done it before. And just in that conversation with him, I said, so how are you documenting this so that the tribal knowledge isn't just in the team that did this one, but if some of you move out the other day, how do we get some other people that can pick up where you left off? And what was interesting, he said to me right at that moment, that's awesome you said that, because one of the guys was working on a project I've done many times before in second shift, and he hadn't worked on this project much before. So I went over and talked him through it, and I just started writing everything down I could think of to help him to be able to do the job as well as I could do the job. And the next morning he came in and he said the job was just about perfect. And I guess I'm just going into that story to say, when you talk about doing something, if you're only doing it once or twice a year, there's a lot of learning curve for some of these projects that are complicated. And you write it down, you document it, that affects your culture and the confidence taking something in. But a company really has to understand that that first one is going to take a lot longer than the ones to follow. How much does that play a factor when you're contemplating a project like that?
So it's a great question. We have our first, what we call a first article process, which most companies, if they aren't doing, should be doing, where we we do a couple of different things. First is it something that's the first time that we'll be doing a lot of, that will have a learning curve. The second is risk, right? So this company, even though this part seems very simple on the surface, they're asking for 10,000 pieces. Should we really run a first batch just to make sure everything's good before we run all these parts, and we put ourselves at risk that if they're wrong, we're out all this material and lost time, right? And so so we have a first article process that not only does just that, like it's basically a quality assurance through each work center, but also develops processes within specific to that part to help us to gain efficiencies. For instance, if I know that I'm doing a large project that would be in excess of, however much risk and however much money, we might do a first article run that's like more than one piece. So it's like 5 pieces or something, so that we can learn not only how to make the part correctly, but also we learn efficiencies in making those 5 parts. And obviously by the 5th part is probably the best version of the part, but we also have developed how we're going to do this part, whether it's, from fixturing for weldments to understanding, the size of material that we want to bring in, how we're ordering that material, and then for the runs that we know we're going to do in production. And that's constant. That's not necessarily a destination, but a way of business, right? So our first article process is a living process. It's constantly evolving, but we do take that process very seriously, and actually have resources dedicated to that. And so I work with that team very a pretty lockstep, because a lot of stuff that I'm doing is either new or it's a new customer, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving a great first impression, and then that continuity strategy to make sure that we're delivering quality products on
So
time.
who's at the table for that conversation? Is it engineering? Is it fab? Is it weld? Who do you bring to that table so that it's a real conversation and not just a, well, we could do it this way. We'll have to talk to that department.
So we have first article meetings at least once, if not more than once a week, to go over all the parts that we deem first articles, and those are all the leaders. So the managers of each department, and then any line level supervisors that would be directly involved. Usually that's like the weld supervisors that would be directly involved, so that we can so that we determine like things like, well, okay, what type of fixture do we need for this? What and how are we going to approach this? And even all the way down to in some cases, the packaging. Okay, this thing's painted now, and we got a bunch of them, and it's really big. How are we going to get this to the customer? And so though we might have estimated all these things into the offering to the customer as far as a dollar sign, but we'll have to drill down into the actual execution of it. So usually it's our leaders. So our department leadership, our first article project manager, and usually like myself, our strategic product group, which is usually the quoting team that was involved in the conversations to deliver the expectation to our team from the customer.
Man, communication is so complex there, and what I think is interesting, and every organization deals with this. Something may not have gone well from the handoff from this group to this group, and then later that day, you're sitting in a meeting with those same people, having to come up with solutions for the next project and stuff. And just having that ability to be frank with each other, to speak candidly with each other, and I just think that says something about the importance of your culture. How do we move forward without living in the past, saying, "Oh, you jacked that up in the
Oh
past"?
yeah, oh yeah. Or like, how did this happen?
So, what have you seen in your days in this role? What have you seen about the importance of building trust, and what are some keys that you've seen about how that trust has been built?
So that's a great question too. So some things in my mind, um, what I've learned in my experiences is that you have to have the right people in the right positions, right? And then you have certain people that I guess would, for lack of a better term, would be glue or bridges. And I think a lot of my job requires to be a bridge. I got to bridge the departments together to smash barriers on communication, so because we have direct communication, that communication is flowing. Because you're right, like, once you hand the part from from the laser department over to the brake department, they have to understand what they have, what information needs to be on the prints that we develop for that specific step. Our traveler that we use that they clock into has the proper notes for the settings of the machine, or whatever, what have you. Always needs to, and everybody needs to know where that information is, right? So we have a process that's pretty standard in that regard. But any kind of things that are specific to that part that needs to be articulated, we have to be able to have these conversations so that they know where to go look for this information, that the information is going to be there. So a lot of times, especially on larger projects, we'll have these meetings so that everybody's on the same page. And unfortunately, sometimes that there's something that gets missed, but our ability to go back and look and how to improve that is intrinsic to our ability to be successful. So communication is key. Having enough information, not just communication via email, but we all work in prints in our industry, man. So our prints need to be clean. And for those of you watching that are in a shop like ourselves, you understand that your prints from your customer are usually like some sort of engineering print, which is great because engineers can engineer everything they want to in this model, but that's not necessarily real world. So like it requires us to say, okay, guys, this is great, but we're going to have to do it this way to actually fabricate it into real life. And so having these conversations and having the communication open with the customer too, because everything that we get that might be a 3D model from the customer has to get broken down in each component part that has to be fabricated in order to make that total assembly happen. And so in doing that, we have to have what I would say, for lack of a better term, is Zephyr speak on some of our own prints so that we know how this part needs to be traveled through the shop so that the things can happen to it that need to happen to it to ultimately make that final part for the customer's expectation.
Love that. And I guess I'd ask this question. Is there anything that builds trust more than wins? Like when you hit a couple of projects and you just hit them out of the park, doesn't that bring the team together to want to keep, hey, let's take on a new first article, let's take on a new project? What's your experience with that?
Oh, absolutely. So, and I try to share those as much as I can because morale is a huge contributor, right? So, if you're constantly naysaying or bringing bad news or what have you, and even when it is bad news, it's how you present it to the team, right? Like in my mind, it's always got to be a fail forward. Like, okay, this happened, but this is what we need to do in the future to make sure this doesn't happen. And then you need buy-in. Buy-in is huge. Like the team's got to be bought in to, okay, this is the goal. We got this big project. This is what it means to us. Here's how we're going to approach it. And then is everybody on board? And so, well, hey, yes, we can do that, but we really need to do it like this. That's a great idea, but so we're going to incorporate that. So the buy-in from your team is almost paramount to make sure that everybody's on board so that the expectation is met. So even if you fail, you at least have tried something. Now as a team, you're going to go back and say, okay, well, that didn't work. How are we going to work through this? And then when we have a major win, we share that with the group. And so a lot of times what we do with our customers, I'll even have them bring a final finished product that the customer has developed down here for our guys to actually see where the parts that they built can actually, they can see the whole totality of the situation. And so fortunately we do a lot of water parks. And so they get to see these pictures of these massive water slides and stuff that are in play. And so that's been those things absolutely build culture. They build team morale and then ultimately build more productivity.
All right. I told you Brandon had a lot of energy, loved his insights, and loved how he brings a different perspective to the conversation than some of the shop owners that we've had or some of the other leaders in the industry. So thanks to Brandon for that. Again, subscribe to the podcast. If you're interested in being a part of the Circle of Five coaching community, by all means, reach out. Let me know. Let's get you connected. Let's invest in your mid-level leaders in your organization. So glad you're a part of this. In the next episode, we'll talk more with Brandon about workforce development, about their re-entry process that they do working with their individuals in incarceration at Zephyr, and then about why would Zephyr hold a shop tour for their competitors. Check out that next episode.